A couple of years ago, I moved out of my dorm room and into an apartment. None of the furniture in the dorm belonged to me, so I needed to get everything. I had more money saved up and planned to save for a few more months before making big purchases for the apartment. However, there were a few things I needed right away, one of which was a bed frame. After buying a new mattress, I didn't want to spend a lot on a frame. I checked out a few used furniture sites and landed on Craigslist, which had the most postings. Many were cheap or even free, but they all looked horrible. Then I found one that wasn't too bad, a plain wooden bed frame that didn't look too worn out. I sent a quick email asking if it was still available and continued my search. A minute later, I got a reply. The man said it was available for $35. It was a perfect deal, so I quickly accepted and we arranged to meet later that day at 6 p.m. While waiting, I unboxed some things and rearranged the bedroom to make space for the frame. At 5:30, the man emailed me his address. It was 20 minutes away in an area I hadn't been to yet, though I wasn't familiar with many places since I had just moved. I grabbed some cash and headed out. As I drove, I looked around to get familiar with the surroundings. About halfway there, the area became less populated with buildings and houses. It wasn't what I expected. When I reached his neighborhood, I felt a bit better seeing that the houses weren't too far apart and the area looked mostly normal, though the houses weren't very nice. I pulled up to the address and parked in the driveway. The lights were on and the front door was open. I got out and rang the doorbell. A tall, heavy man wearing a hat and jacket answered and invited me in. He didn't look strange, but something about him felt off. Maybe it was the way he talked, like we were old friends. I followed him upstairs to a small spare bedroom. The room looked occupied, with a dresser, nightstands, and clothes lying around. Even the bed frame had a mattress with sheets and blankets. I clarified that I only wanted the bed frame, not the mattress or anything else. He agreed. The bed frame looked fine, so I decided to buy it. He smiled and offered to help me carry it to my truck, but wanted a drink first. He went to the hallway and quickly returned with 2 glasses of beer. He held one out to me, but I politely declined. He looked confused and insisted it would be fun to hang out. I told him I was busy and just wanted to buy the bed frame and leave, but he became pushy. His smile turned less genuine as he urged me to have a drink. I quickly stepped past him into the hallway to avoid being cornered. I told him I was going to leave. He immediately changed his attitude, apologizing and offering the bed frame for free. I ignored him and walked faster down the stairs. I heard him coming after me but managed to leave before he caught up. As I pulled away, I saw him standing at the front door. Maybe he was just a lonely guy looking for a friend, but the whole situation felt too strange. The room was clearly in use when I got there, which didn't match the ad. When I got home, I checked the posting again, but it was gone. The bed frame had been shown by itself in the ad, without a mattress or anything. Whatever that man was up to, I didn't like it. I'm a 29-year-old woman, and this happened to me 3 years ago. At the time, I lived far from my family, but a serious situation required me to be there for a few months. My options for staying there were either an expensive hotel or renting from a private owner. Finding a short-term rental was tough because most people required at least a 6-month lease. After several days of searching online with no luck, I turned to Craigslist. I found a small house not too far from where I needed to be. It seemed affordable, and the ad didn't specify a minimum lease period. I called the number on the page, and an older woman answered. She spoke slowly, but we had a conversation about the property and pricing. She kindly agreed to a 4-month lease. A few weeks later, I arrived at the property. It was close to where I needed to be, but it was also far from the main city and tucked away in the woods. The woman had left a key and some papers taped to the door. I went inside to look around. The house was old and cramped. After unpacking a bit, I rested after the long drive, just watching TV. Around 7 p.m., there was a knock at the door. I checked my phone, but didn't see any messages from the woman. Looking through the peephole, I saw a man standing a few feet away from the porch. I opened the door. "Hi, how can I help you?" I asked. He kept a serious face and explained he was there to clean the fireplace. I glanced at his van parked in the driveway behind my car, then back at him. "Isn't it a little late? It's almost 7:30, I said. He shrugged and said, "That's what was scheduled." I told him to wait a minute, closing the door and walking to the living room. I texted and tried calling the woman but couldn't reach her. The fireplace didn't seem dirty, but since it wasn't my house, I thought maybe it was just a service she had scheduled. Despite my hesitation, the specificity of fireplace cleaning made me think he might be telling the truth. I went back to the door, and this time he was standing right on the porch just a couple of feet away. It startled me to see him so close all of a sudden. Before I could say anything, he said he needed to start now and stepped closer, putting his hand on the door and pushing it open a bit more. I was getting uncomfortable and rethinking everything. "Yeah, just give me one more minute and I'll let you in," I said, trying to close the door. But he kept his hand on it, preventing me from closing it. I had no choice but to let him in. I walked him over to the fireplace and he followed me closely. He looked at it for only a second. As he turned around, I grabbed my keys from the counter and ran out to my car. His heavy footsteps shook the house as I got into my car. He ran up to the window just as I started the engine. With his van blocking the driveway, I had to drive through the woods, dodging trees until I made it back to the road. I called the police while driving, too scared to stop. When officers arrived, the man and his van were gone. The front door was wide open, showing he wasn't supposed to be there. From what the police and I could gather, the man probably knew the house was being rented out and assumed the new resident wouldn't know if a fireplace cleaning was scheduled. It's anyone's guess what he planned to do. But thankfully, I got away safely. I had heard warnings about using Craigslist, stories of people getting scammed, robbed, or worse. But I was desperate. I needed a new apartment as soon as possible, and my budget was tight. So I took a chance and started browsing the housing section on Craigslist. I found a listing for a small apartment in an old downtown building. The rent was cheap and the location was perfect for my job. I emailed the owner and he responded quickly. We arranged a time to meet, and a couple of days later I drove over there. When I arrived, I felt a bit let down. The old brick facade was crumbling and the windows were dirty, with one even boarded up. I climbed the stairs to the second floor and knocked on the door of apartment 2B. The man who opened the door was surprisingly friendly. He showed me around the small but nice apartment, which was in good condition. He told me he was renovating the whole building and that the construction noise would be temporary. We discussed the price and I decided to take the deal. Later that week, I moved in and set everything up. Despite the building's exterior, the inside of my apartment was nice. 3 weeks went by without any problems. However, I started to realize something strange. Nobody else seemed to live in the building. I never saw anyone parked outside or walking inside, and I never heard anyone through the thin walls. Additionally, I never heard any construction going on, as the owner had said. I kept these thoughts in the back of my mind until one morning when I saw one of the other room's doors partially open. I walked past it and went about my day. But when I got back that night, it was still open. I figured it must be vacant and pushed it open further. Inside, the room was dusty and smelled awful, with webs and stains all over the walls. It looked abandoned for years. Disgusted, I stepped out and closed the door. Curious, I knocked on my neighbor's door, 2A, but nobody answered. I turned the handle, and it was unlocked. Inside, the room looked the same as the other one, abandoned for years. Feeling uncomfortable, I went back to my room and texted the owner, asking if any of the other rooms were ready to be rented out. While my room was nice, it felt eerie and uncomfortable living alone in what seemed like an abandoned building. 10 minutes later, I heard the front door open. Someone walked up to my door and knocked. "Hello, who is it?" I asked. "It's the owner," he responded. I opened the door and he smiled. "I saw your text and thought I'd come in person," he said. I nervously smiled back, saying I was just curious about the other rooms. I didn't want to admit I had gone inside them. He maintained his smile. "Why don't I show you one of the rooms I'm finishing up?" I reluctantly followed him across the hall, but he stopped by apartment 2A, the room I had just been in. He pushed open the door and walked in, telling me to come inside and have a look. I hesitated, trying to think of an excuse, but he insisted, now demanding I come in. I backed away and ran to my room, locking the door behind me. I heard him rushing down the stairs and out of the building. After I was sure he left, I packed up everything, and the next day I moved out and never looked back. When I was in college, like most people, I didn't have a lot of money. During the summertime, I would work a job, and at college I had an on-campus job as well. But I didn't get many hours or much pay from it. I didn't have the time for a normal or even part-time job while I was at school, because I had a lot of homework and spent extra time studying since school was difficult for me. During my junior year, I really wanted some more money. I decided to go on Craigslist and look for some quick jobs that I could do. One day I went on and looked under the general labor section. These would be good jobs for me because I was a pretty fit 21-year-old guy, hoping to find something like yard work. Soon I saw an ad that simply said yard cleanup. This was just what I was hoping for, so I clicked on it. There weren't many details at all. It just said, "Need someone to clean up my yard. Will take a couple of hours. Pay $100. The ad had only been posted an hour earlier, so I responded quickly. The person got back to me soon, and I agreed to the job. They asked if I could come on Friday night, and I asked what time. They said 9 p.m. This was kind of strange to me because I would expect to be doing yard work during the daytime. I should have questioned them and asked why so late, but I didn't. I was just afraid if I did, they would get mad and find somebody else. I really wanted the money, plus I was free at that time and didn't have class the next morning. I agreed to it, and they gave me the address. On Friday night, I put the address in my phone and drove to the location. I had never been to that area before, and it was almost 20 minutes away. The location was a house with a pretty decent-sized yard. It was in a residential neighborhood, but I couldn't tell much about the area because it was nighttime and really dark. There were only a couple of dimly lit street lamps around. I let the person know that I was there by texting them, and then got out of my car. I was about 5 minutes early and started walking up to the house. It was a 2-story house that looked pretty average to me. There were some overgrown bushes in the yard as well as leaves and such. I walked up to the front door and rang the doorbell. All the lights in the house appeared to be off, which was kind of strange. About a minute went by and nobody came to the door. Then I knocked, thinking maybe their doorbell was broken or something. After knocking, I still heard nothing. I waited and then double-checked on my phone to make sure I was at the correct address. I was, but nobody responded to my text either. I knocked one more time. Still, no one came to the door. But then I heard something out in the yard. It sounded like footsteps coming from my right, almost from the side of the house. I looked over, but it was very dark, and there was also a tree blocking my view, so I couldn't see anything. I took a couple of steps back to look. The footsteps were a ways away, but clearly in the yard of the property I was at. When I moved back, the footsteps stopped. I called out, asking if somebody was there. I thought maybe it was the homeowner, but I didn't get a response. I was starting to feel kind of creeped out by this situation. Then I heard the footsteps again. I couldn't take it anymore and started walking away. I didn't look behind me and walked all the way to my car. I got inside and locked the doors. I looked out to the yard and didn't see anyone. Then I checked my phone for the last time to see if there was a response. Still nothing. I started driving back to my college apartment, but when I was still on that quiet street, I saw a car appear behind me. I hadn't seen exactly where it came from, but it looked like it might have actually come out of the driveway of the house I was at. The car followed me off that street and on to the next one. When I got back on the highway to go back to campus, the car did as well. It stayed with me when I took the exit too. By then, I was getting really suspicious. I kept driving, but when I got about a mile from campus, The car finally stopped following me. It took a left when I took a right. I was able to make it back, but after that, I decided not to go on Craigslist anymore. I don't know if the car that followed me had anything to do with it or not. I feel like it did, but I don't have any proof. What I do know is that the experience was very strange. The person never contacted me at all after that, and I still don't know who was walking behind the tree. They definitely heard me when I called out to them but didn't respond. I'm glad that I left when I did. Last month, I decided to sell my old TV and stand on Craigslist. I had a new, larger TV mounted on the wall, so the old one was just taking up space in the dining room. My wife had been urging me to get rid of it, and I thought I could make some money from it. After a few days with no interest, I was considering lowering the price, but then I got a message from a man who seemed interested. He asked to see it, and after confirming he was serious, I gave him my address and arranged for him to come over at 7 p.m. the next night. We live in an average-sized 2-story home, and because the TV and stand were bulky, I didn't want to move them to a public place. It seemed fine to give out my address. The next night I waited for him, but he didn't arrive until 8 p.m. When he finally showed up, it was dark outside, and he came in a small sedan, which clearly couldn't fit the TV or stand. I watched as he drove slowly by the house, and then parked a bit further down the street, almost out of sight. He walked up wearing a hooded sweatshirt and looked to be in his 20s. I invited him in and showed him the TV and stand. After a few seconds of looking, he said he wanted to buy it but couldn't pay until Friday. Annoyed, I walked him to the door asking why he came if he couldn't buy it today. He said he just wanted to see it and left. After he left, I sat on the couch to watch TV. My wife, who had been upstairs, came down and asked why the guy had gone into our backyard. I was confused. She told me she saw him walk around the house and into the backyard. I looked out the front window and saw his car still down the street. I checked the back windows and saw him hiding behind a bush. I cracked open the window and yelled that I would call the police if he didn't leave. He got up and sprinted back to his car, driving off quickly. I took the listing off Craigslist and reported the incident. I regretted giving him my address and was grateful my wife saw him go into the backyard. Who knows what he was planning?